in Colorado someplace, so I had to rewrite some of the things that I thought would be, at least be somewhat beneficial. And I come here from the high country. Our church is about 8,800 feet, and we have extremely low humidity. So anything over about 5%, I'm suffocating. And I'm sitting here, I pulled out the paper, and it feels like toilet paper. You forget it. There's nothing's crunchy here. It's all soft. It's just like, this is, my Bible is shrunk. But when you buy something in Colorado Springs where we live, and you take it just from Colorado Springs, is only about, what, 6,200, 6,100 feet where your in-laws live, 62 at the top of Kissing Camels there. And by the time you get up to our place, it's about 2,600 feet higher. So that's 2,600 feet is pretty high for most places. This is 2,600 feet from a place where people already suffer from elevation. And by the time you get something down the springs and you bring it up to Woodland Park, if it's yogurt or something like that and you open it, you've got to be careful because it'll spray everywhere. And if it's for instance, the potato chips or anything like that down in the springs, by the time you get up to our place, it is swollen and it is absolutely tight. And so the only thing I can think, and just to warn you, is that when you come back down, and it does this, like I've got Visine in my pocket, it's shriveled up, is that my brain goes this when I come down the mountain. So that makes it appropriate to forget the scholarship, and we'll just kind of go through some things and hopefully, kind of like when you go into a restaurant and they give you a little bit of sorbet. The meat has already been eaten for this conference. Now I'm just going to try and give you a little bit of sorbet to digest it all a little bit. I also bring greetings from Joe and Pam Kelly. They attend our church when they're not in the Republic of Texas. When they come to the territory up in Colorado. And actually, where Joe and Pam live is a territory. They are in the middle of nowhere, and that's partly your fault, isn't it? But Joe wanted to be here. He's been very busy trying to take care of things at his place. And we are blessed. We have a small town, basically, that's a bedroom community for Colorado Springs. We are being taken over by an extreme group of charismatics. We are on their blacklist because we believe that God is sovereign, so nobody should attend our church. Have you ever heard of Andrew Womack? Charis College has opened up an institution in our town, and it's driven the price up, and very few people can afford to come there now if they're not affiliated with the school. And so it's just completely changed the dynamics of a small town. But God has blessed us. We lost Gary and Barbara. And losing Gary and Barbara, we still have Dr. Joe there. But we also have a man that's been a PCA pastor for approximately 30 years. In fact, you've used Mark for languages for some of the classwork. I think, Zach, you took classes from Dr. House. That we have Mark House, who's got his PhD, and he teaches in a Presbyterian seminary down in Colorado Springs, and he's teaching in our church. We have another man that has been a pastor for 25 years. He has his doctoral work at Trinity in Dearborn, Illinois, and he's also moved up there. He's been a pastor, and he has a brother that's an ultra runner. You guys probably never heard of an ultra runner. They run 100-mile-plus races, and this is crazy. Just to give you an idea, Greg, he lives in Cascade. Do you know where that is? He leaves his, like last week, he left his house one night in Cascade about 9 o'clock in the evening and just runs to the top of Pikes Peak and then runs back home from the top of Pikes Peak. That's about 32 miles or so. And but anyway, his brother Jay is a very good preacher. And I look at that and I think we are extremely fortunate to have all that. And I look at it also as to help offset what people have to go through with me. You guys, a lot of you don't know me. I'm new to this with all of you. They've asked me to be on the board. I've got my wife Sharon. We've got 5 kids. We have 3 girls, and I've got 2 grandkids, 1 on the way. And then I've got 2 boys. One, my oldest son, is in the Marines. He's serving right now over in Okinawa. He works on the CH-53 helicopter over there. And then I've got a youngest son, he's 20, and he was actually drafted last month by the Kansas City Royals. And so that's a part of what I wanted to speak about tonight, because we talk about eschatology. And the last month has been interesting in our life. I was busy for about 3 months prior to this with all the pre-draft stuff and scouts wanting to follow Jeremy, wanting contact, needing information from him. The amount of information that the major league teams want from a kid is unbelievable. But, you know, in a small town, Jeremy's a homeschool kid that went to a small junior college in Kansas, and he got drafted fairly high in the 12th round by the defending World Series champions. And you know, in a small town, that's a big deal. And so I have people just coming up to me, isn't this the greatest thing? And I was at a barbecue the other day on July 4th, and our neighbor, you love him, he's from Texas, and he's a Baylor Bear, sweet man, and he comes up to me and he kept hitting my arm. He goes, "Oh, Jeff, you're living the dream," you know? And you know, 5 minutes later, he'd come back up to me and he's hit me and goes, "Your son's a professional baseball player." And I was joking when I said, "Mark," I said, "the worst 2 weeks of his life in baseball were the last 2 weeks." I said, he's absolutely miserable. He's going from the changes. I've been there in sports where you have to go from where it's fun. You work hard, it's fun, but now it's professional. The coaches you love, and now it's strictly professional. And it's a kick because he he says, "You know, you guys are just living the dream." And I'm like, "No, Mark." I said, "You know what? I don't want my son's contentment bound up with his ability to succeed in baseball. Because baseball, at the end of the day, is just a game. It is very temporary, and I hope that he can do well for his sake, and I especially hope he does, Jim and I are talking about, I hope he does well so my son can get back from Okinawa and be able to see him playing some games. But if not, you know what? The world's not going to slow down to say, we got this kid, and he needs to have his dreams fulfilled." And so when we talk about this, Gary had asked me to pick a subject for eschatology, and I thought, you know what? You've got all these really smart guys. They don't, you know, they're let them have at it. And, you know, you can have a little sorbet at the end. Ron and I were joking about that. Why'd they stick us at the end? You know what happens when you're at the bottom of the lineup, Ron? You know, you're going to pull a pinch hitter in for these guys real quick. And I just figured Gary had put me last, secretly hoping that the rapture would happen before I got up here. And so when you go through all this, you realize that the dream is something that we get infected with in the church real quickly. I mean, we live in the United States, and some of you, you know, have been able to travel overseas and see other places. I mean, I even got the opportunity years ago to travel in the Soviet Union and to work with pastors while it still was the Soviet Union. And I saw things. When people talk about socialism, you know, I lived in Miami for 11 years. You can talk about Cuba. When you go through places and you're visiting pastors in their apartments in the Soviet Union, it's a whole nother world. And we have this American dream, and we can sit there and talk about heaven, but the reality is we get too infected by the American dream ourselves. I mean, we breathe it in every day, and it's very difficult to separate ourselves from it. And so I talked to Gary, and I said, you know what? I said, honestly, let the guys who have the higher IQs take care of that. And the sense that in over 30 years of doing this, I've never run into a husband and wife that are having an argument over millennialism versus premillennialism. Maybe, has anybody ever had that? He's mid-trib and I'm post-trib. What do we do? And it never had that. But they do need a renewed sense that they live as vapors before an eternal God, and that we are to be abounding always in the work of the Lord. And so that's what we're going to do right now, is just go through some things that are very basic, because I left my notes inside the computer. I didn't leave it. My computer's about 40 years old, and it wasn't cooperating right before Jim and I were supposed to leave. But you ever read any of these books? So I just grabbed a couple real quick. And this is by Paul David Tripp. You guys, I mean, you guys are familiar with the Tripp brothers. I thank God for them. In a day and age where so much, so much what we think, guys will claim biblical counseling, it's all man-centered. And thankfully, there's some people out there that are excellent. But he begins this section in dealing with eternity, and it's the fact that we are created not for ourselves. We're created for something much greater. And people in our town are going, oh, yeah, baseball. We're created for something bigger than baseball, bigger than Kansas City. And so Tripp writes this. He says, why is it so hard for us to be satisfied? Why do so many of our marriages struggle over the long run? Why do we have such a hard time getting along with family and friends? Why do we carry so much debt? Why do we stand in front of full closets and say we have, what? Nothing to wear? Why do we look into fully stocked refrigerators and say what? We have nothing to eat? Why do so many of us consistently spend more than we earned? We struggle with envy. Our culture tends to be over drug, over sex. Why do we spend so much time making sure we are incessantly entertained? Why do our trials paralyze us more than they should? Why do people so easily disappoint us? And he goes on to name a whole list of things. And what he's simply saying is that living the dream, and we get sucked into that, into our society, makes us forget the real dream, and that is what Ron just spoke about, the hope that we have that is only found in the glory of Jesus Christ. And hopefully, as we've received excellent teaching and rare biblical absolutes, pulling the truth out of Scripture, taking those absolutes to realize absolutely I should be changed every day. And we have the privilege to help change one another, to be change agents in each other's lives, to become more like Jesus Christ. Now, Ron, you guys, he's an artist. You got to see some of his work. That's only a very small portion, because he's done a lot of sports. And you love what? Baseball. It's the only what? Go ahead. So, we'll ask questions on that later. Let me ask you a question. When you're in the major leagues, how wide is home plate? Yeah. 60 feet 6 inches. But if you're taking home, does anybody know that? What is it? Close, 17. Take 17 inches. That's in the major leagues. You know what it is in the minor leagues? 17 inches. You know what it is in college? 17 inches. High school, Babe Ruth, travel ball, Little League, youth leagues, what is it? 17 inches. Every single point, it's at 17 inches. And it's a reminder to us when guys are up here speaking that these are absolutes that are scriptural. And what the church has done is good at saying, well, you know what, this kid's struggling, this guy's struggling. You know what, we need an adjustable home plate. We need something to be able to adjust things. You know, maybe if this guy's really good and this next guy's not so good, maybe we could widen it for one guy, narrow it for the other, and that way we can handicap the league, and everything will be okay. But life's not like that. Life's not like that before God. There's absolutes, and what we have to do is be able to take and understand that the absolute truth of Scripture, the absolute truth of God, is being absolutely worked out every single day, allowing us to look into the future through the difficulties of daily living, being able to understand that we have that hope that Ron just spoke of. We have that hope, and that hope can't be taken away from us. But in today's world, very few people are prepared for the future because they're made to think so much is important of today, or they want to adjust to make home fit better. This last spring in March Madness, Michigan State coach Tom Izzo, he had said that one of the problems with college sports today, and especially college basketball, you got these kids they call one and done. They get drafted, or they get recruited, but they only use the school for 1 year to hop right into the NBA. And you know, the one and done is very popular, but people all hear about the one and done. Very few people hear about the one and done, not going into the pros, but one and done, that they didn't like the coach, they didn't like the school, they didn't get enough shots, they wanted to play shooting guard, they didn't want to play point guard, they wanted to play strong forward, not, you know, all these different things that the coach didn't give them, and so they, as they go to one school, they immediately go to the next. And Tom Izzo said we have a real problem because we've raised an entire generation of kids athletically that are not prepared to deal with difficulties or disappointment. No, we have a society that's no different from that. And so when we speak of these things, we have to understand and we have to give thanks that the dream isn't the American dream. It's the vision of the glory of the Lord Jesus Christ. I was talking to you. Now, how many in here are from Texas? Wow. You got all these people on, except for you. Well, you're Missouri, so it doesn't. I had to drive through Texas last month to go visit a camp for the San Diego Padres. And I got caught in Houston when it was raining hard. It was absolutely pathetically terrible. But I've never seen so many construction cones in all my life. For one state, I thought, whoever supplies this state with construction cones has to have a good business. But one of the kids down there, we walked into a restaurant, and he said, if these people knew what we were here for, now, you're here because you might get drafted. And he said, it would be, have you seen the movie The Natural with Robert Redford? And there's this place where Robert Redford, his past is caught up with him, and he's got to go into the hospital, and the only bed that they have available in the hospital is there in the women's maternity. And so he's there, and he's laying there in bed, and his girlfriend walks in, the one that when she showed up at the game, he hit, and then the other one, he couldn't hit anything. And so he says, you know, I want people to be able to see, and when I walk down the street, they can say, there goes the greatest baseball player of all time. And that's what this one kid was like. And in the movie, the answer was, and then. And he goes, well, they say there's the greatest player of all time. And he goes, and then. Or she says it to him, and then. And that's what I wanted to say to this kid. And then, you know, what are you going to do? Even if you get drafted, you go to the bottom of the barrel. Even if you go to the next level, people don't realize this. If you're in the Kansas City Royals organization, there are 4 rookie teams. There's one in the Dominican Republic, there's one in Arizona that my son's on, there's one in Idaho Falls, and Burlington, North Carolina. There's 30 players on each team, that's 120 kids trying to make it to what's traditionally called the minor leagues, which you have high A and low A, then you have double A, and then finally you have triple A. The odds of anybody ever making it to the major leagues is astounding. Part of it's politics, part of it's the money they gave you in your signing bonus, part of it's where you measure up, and part of it's actually how well you do or you do not do. But it's not a dream. It can come and it can go just like that. And we fall prey to that. So I want to go over a couple things while we have just a few moments and close this time. The first thing is we talk about the term that I gave Gary, eschatological shepherding. And that is that we have to understand we are to teach pastorally in this. We are to teach pastorally in the sense that, and I appreciate so much of the way these men did this, that it's not just simply laying down facts, but it's recognizing that this is teaching who God is, and teaching who God is the most applicable thing that we can give to people. Eschatology is one discipline or section of systematic theology, but systematic theology is never a unit all by itself. It's all intertwined of the whole counsel of God. And eschatology begins with the doctrine of God, and it ends with the doctrine of God, because it points to the fact that God is all things, God is all of our hope, and it is God that eschatology points us to. And so through that, we are thankful that God is God, and God is in the process of working out his purpose through the difficulties. And part of the people sucking up to the American dream, I hate to say it that way, but that's just the way it is, where they think that somehow if we can do this or if we could do that with politics, as if we're going to change things when we have a God-rejecting country. How foolish. And so I'm very thankful for the way that these men taught. I'm thankful for the guys who have come out of dispensationalism like I have. I mean, I used to have the bumper sticker, you know, if this car is unmanned, and it gives the reason for that in my room. I looked through my mom's books when I moved her from her house into the assisted living where she's in, and there you got, you know, there was the late great Planet Earth still on the shelves, and all the books from the 1970s and the oil crisis and Armageddon. You know, when I was teaching in the master's college years ago, I had a book, I lost it in Hurricane Andrew, but I had a book that was a kick. It wasn't written as a comedian, it was written for real people, and it had a section on how to identify who Antichrist was, and it said, you know, originally you've got the Greek, and then it goes over to the English, so we have to take the letters of the English alphabet, and we take A for, you know, representing 1, and then you go to 6, and you go all through the alphabet, and you take the word computer, and you add it up, it comes up to 666. And then it said if you take the word Kennedy and you add it up, it adds up to 666. And so I started coming up with my own combinations. And then it actually had one chapter devised, and this was way back in the 1980s when you didn't get mailings every week for credit cards, but it'd take your credit cards and be able to run up a huge debt and stick it to Antichrist. All the Christians are gone, but we left our debt to Antichrist. And I thought, that's insane. And then when we moved to Miami and I was a pastor there, I met people that actually did that. And you guys all have your stories. Eschatology is an absolutely fantastic subject because it gives us hope in the present. You know, there's always a therefore. What does it say in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 11? Therefore, since, therefore, what manner, what? How should you be living? Therefore what, Max? So what? It has implications today. Skip down to verse 18. Therefore, what? Grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Why? Because you got days of eternity. That's should be the American dream. And that's why Paul said after the long chapter in 1 Corinthians 15, he says, what, therefore? In fact, why don't you turn there, just to wake everybody up. Turn to 1 Corinthians 15. The Bible, that's a novel thing. You know this, verse 58. Therefore, my beloved brethren, be what? 1 Corinthians 15:58. Be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is what? Not in vain in the Lord. And you know that we have a hope. Thankfully, even through our own stupidity, our own things, you know, I love how when Gary got up here and he said, I've held that view at least till today, whatever it was he said. You know, there's some mysteries in some of these things, and it always takes us back to the mystery should show the glory of God, though. and should cause us in the midst of the good days and the bad days to continue pressing on in the Lord. Well, secondly, if you have just the term eschatology, if you take it, and I'm not giving you a fancy outline because that's in the computer, or lost in the computer. If you simply take the word shepherding, and that I'll tell you, shepherding is that which I've been teaching for Providence. We are to be those that are shepherds to God's people. You got Jacob in the back. Jacob has been a marvelous student. I was thankful to being able to work with Zach before him. That these are two very, very sharp guys. Two different backgrounds in life, two different experiences, but they're a perfect example of one calling by one God. And I appreciate that about both of them. I want to see in a person, I want to see a humble spirit that shows itself in a continual teachable heart. Both of these guys exhibit that. And just to give you an idea of what we teach in higher elevation of pastoral theology at Providence Theological Seminary, Jacob, you don't have a tie on today, so you must feel very safe back there. Why is it that it's advisable for a man speaking to wear a tie?
Well, the good thing about a tie is it's just the right length and diameter, that you can roll it up and stick it in your mouth and chew on it.
It became a joke in our churches that you'd see somebody going like this when I'd be talking to a person that's a problem, and it would be a reminder, use the tie if you need to, but keep your mouth shut. There's times where it's better kept not open. But, I got my friend Jim Adams, my dear friend, he went to Columbia when I was teaching down there 2 years ago, and he introduces himself to everybody as what? You do. Sheepdog. That he's not a quote-unquote official shepherd, but he's part of the trying to get the sheep together. And that means that we are called to take care, loving, close-up, intimate, purposed, aggressive love, to seek to be an instrument for our Lord Jesus Christ to wash his people clean, to present them to himself, getting these people safely home to heaven. And that's in a context where it's not always easy. I was joking with Josh and Reagan. Josh is the one that's been leading us in singing so well. And I don't know if you know this, but they got married on June 11th. And so they're sitting here as newlyweds. And I was asking them, what vows did you give? And you had the traditional vows. And the traditional vows, basically, when you go to a wedding, the traditional vows are what? It doesn't say, you're just going to have this fun time together. Create your own bucket list and go for it. What a fun opportunity, a joy. You're now husband and wife. Woohoo! What's the vows do? It is the realization that this life is going to be extremely difficult, and that through the difficulties of this life, whether it's sickness or in health, it doesn't matter what it is, until what? Death. That even the vows in the wedding ceremony show the difficulty, the tension that we live in. The Romans 8 that was mentioned yesterday, the groaning, the tension of Galatians 5:17, where it's flesh against spirit. It's a song where we sing, we're prone to wander. We're not just prone to wander, but we're prone to leave what? The Lord that we, what? Love. And we get caught up so much in the American things, and we can begin to wonder, why me? How come me? Why do I do this? And I don't know about you guys, but I've been doing this for over 30 years. I've never sought a church. I've never sought a pastoral position. I've wanted to leave it multiple times, and there's times where I think everybody has the Jeremiah 20, and you say, forget it. But then you take a step back, and what do? You realize that there's fire, and it has to come out. And so you do what God has called you to do. But there is the reality that there is difficulty, and people in this world living in difficulty need proper eschatology that is that which glorifies God and gives us hope for daily living. Ron alluded to it in his talk. He didn't get into detail, but Ron, I mentioned the first time I actually met you when we were in a class with Zach, and Ron was sharing with me right away, openly, about how you've been burned in a church. And I'm sure that if we were just to have a session with each other in a group like this, in a small group, the time that could be taken about true wounds received in the Church of Jesus Christ, deep wounds within the Church of Jesus Christ, very real, lasting wounds within the Church of Jesus Christ. And you go back to the eschatology and you go, wait a second, God's still working out his purpose. And we can be thankful for that. So I joke with the guys that there's a couple things needed in churches today. Need to have more tick pickers. I've never even seen a tick. I didn't grow up in Texas, Kansas, Missouri. We didn't have ticks in Seattle that I knew of. In fact, when I went out with my son to have it's a big camp. It was a pre-draft workout for the Kansas City Royals. We stopped in, and I had told his golf coach, his baseball coach, that I would give him lessons. And so, from my background, and we're hitting ball. And afterwards, he's got shorts on. He kneels down, big, strong guy, Ryan Carter, and he says he's got a tick on his leg. It's like, don't throw it away. I want to see it. I've never seen one. But I have seen people that have Lyme disease. And the devastation that comes from Lyme disease from just a little tiny tick. And there's a need in the church where the church is not just a theoretical place where people come, or the places is mentioned where you get, as long as we get the budget, as long as we get the people, and the back door is revolving, and you have 50 come and 50 leave, and 50 come and 50 leave, and it's a revolving cycle, and people are never cared for, that's not a biblical church. But that's the Church of the United States. And there's also the need to get hands dirty. Jim and I got the opportunity. I had lunch with 3 friends that were at our church when we were in Miami, and Jerry was reminding me of the fact that I told him I was glad I was not an Old Testament priest. He's always had, at this point he had the bull Ferdinand, and then he had the cows, and one day he came down and he's telling a story. I'm the city boy, and we killed this cow, and we drugged this cow, and he said, you got to be careful how you drag it, because if you're dragging the cow, Ferdinand's going to get mad, and he can just come up and lift the cow, and then you get the cow, and then you got to quarter the cow, and it was, I think they bet bets on how quick I was going to turn green and how many times I would get sick, and it was, let's make fun of Jeff Day, but there's a need to get hands dirty in the ministry. And I'll tell you what, we have become a church where too often the Western church, there's none of this face-to-face, intimate shepherding. And I went through a time in my life where I remember back in seminary, and I was challenged to read Reformed Pastor by Richard Baxter. And I read it, and the first time I read through it cover to cover, I sat there and I thought, that's a good book, but it must not be relevant to Western society, Western modern society. It must be something that is a good book, but it can't be practiced today because nobody does it. And then I kept thinking about Baxter's Reformed Pastor and kept thinking about the principles of Baxter's Reformed Pastor, and I kept thinking, why not? And the more I read through it again, the more I looked at the church, I kept thinking, this is how it should be, and we make every excuse not to. In fact, the town we're in, when we first moved there, we attended this church, and I was there for 2 weeks. Church was, pretty decent then. It was a typical just evangelical church, not deep, but at least it was a church, and at least there was Christians there. And the second week, the pastor that was in charge, he quit. This board decided they were going to become seeker-friendly. They brought in consultants from Willow Creek and from Rick Warren's group, and they decided this is what they're going to do. And I thought, that's really smart. You got a small town, and you want to have a giant church. You know, you're going to put all this money into stuff. Well, anyway, the pastor that they brought in, is all I did was ask questions of his theology, and then this was on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I would actually received a phone call from an elder kicking me out of the church. But I asked the assistant pastor when we first got there, and I just noticed that, you know, it's just typical evangelicalism. So I just said to him, I said, Bruce, and I have a good relationship with Bruce. I said, Bruce, I said, is there anybody in this church that gets their hands dirty with the saints? What do you mean? Well, they go around, you gotta, you know, look for ticks and pick them out, keep people healthy. You know, he says, oh, you can't do that. You can't do that. This is a big church. I said, Bruce, I said, the high school church, the high school group of the church I used to be at is way bigger than this. I don't think that you're that big, about 400 people, 500 people. He said, yeah, but you don't understand. People are busy. You don't understand. People don't want to be that involved. You don't understand. People don't like you getting too close. You don't understand. It's like, wait a second. This is what Scripture has called us to. And as we look at eschatology, that God is working out his purpose, and as we look at the age that we lived in, he came to save us from this wicked, evil age, and the fact that we still live in this wicked, evil age, we need to all, being made in the image of God, be reminded that this God is the God who has a future for us, and that future is secure because of Christ. And that needs to be constant. And Baxter said, you can give all the sermons you want, but sometimes it's more beneficial to spend 5 minutes with an individual than to just keep preaching at them. And there's got to be that balance, and may God give us such balance. I don't want to pick on my son Jeremy, but 3 years ago, he's 20 now, so it'll be 4 years ago, I was at a tournament with him in California, and there were several college coaches there distinctly to watch Jeremy. He was 16 years old, and he was playing against a team full of 18-year-olds, and every person on that 18-year-old team had assigned to a D1 school. So this is a tough team he's going to get with a very tough lineup. And Jeremy completely dominated the other team, and Jeremy was told by the coach of a big college that he was told that kid's not a finished product. So Jeremy's travel coach, that I really appreciate, was sitting at dinner, and there was just steam. You have birds coming out your ears. This was steam coming out his ears. He was just fried. He goes, how can he say a 16-year-old isn't a finished product? So I said, Steve, I said, if it makes you feel better, I said, in my area, the only finished product I get is when they're dead. And that's actually after I have to look at it, isn't it? We keep seeking to minister to God's people, either until Christ returns or they go to be with him. And that's the task what he has given to us. When we first started our church, in fact, I told this to John MacArthur. I said that you want something to train guys. So one of the best trainings I ever had is when we started our church, I was working in the sheriff's office. I was working there as a dispatcher. I've never done anything like that before in my life. And it was a whole source of, you got to be very careful now, but a whole source of sermon illustrations that you've never found before. From crazy things to happen to people calling and they're just screaming because they realize that this has happened to them that day, and they never thought it would happen to them. They never thought it would happen in any way, shape, or form, and all of a sudden you are the first defense that they have. But we are the people that have the greater defense. We have the greater and the higher calling. And when it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 15, it's chapter 12, verse 15, it says that we are to be in the process of being spent, what? For their souls. Being spent for their souls. And that's what God has called us to. Let me just have you turn to one passage real quick. And that's in 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Actually, I never found out. What time is this go till? About 40 minutes ago, dummy. I don't want to overstay my welcome up here. That, Gary, when you said the other day that Jesus, you got a kind of a combination in your theology, a little Acts 10, or Acts 7, a little Hebrews 10, and you got Jesus standing and Jesus sitting down, and why was he standing? Was it just to give high five or, do this with Stephen? And you said he's what? Yeah, he's ministering as a high priest. Let me ask you a question. If you're right, and I think it's a pretty good way to look at it, and Jesus is standing to bring Stephen into heaven, he's ministering as a high priest to his people. How does that happen? We all believe God is a God of means, right? God uses us to do that task that he does as a high priest. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, how many of you ever preached through 1 Corinthians? I'm actually preaching through 1 Corinthians right now, and every time I turn a page, I sit there and go, you know the book, why did you even get into it in the first place? And then you go to the next chapter and you're going, this is why nobody preaches through this. This is why people who are smarter than you don't do this. Has anybody ever preached through 1 Corinthians? Give me your notes. I'm writing the section on chapter 11 dealing with head coverings. So the longer I'm away from Colorado, the happier I am right now. But if you deal with 1 Corinthians chapter 7, you got this long chapter, 42 verses. And it deals with those who are single, those who are married, those who have been divorced, and those who now are going to get remarried. And there's regulations set up there. And I think sometimes we look at 1 Corinthians 7 and we look at this great chapter, 42 verses, and 1 Corinthians 7 deals with what? It deals with how and what are the regulations, where do we draw the line, this person is in sin or this person is not in sin, this is a biblical, whatever you want to call it. They're allowed to get divorced. They can't, the unbeliever wants to go, all the different things that are there. And you know what it says. But we forget when Paul was giving counsel for specific events, he didn't just lead them to the events. He led them beyond the events to life before Jesus Christ. And I want to give you a quick example. Look at the text here and look at verse 17. Only as the Lord has assigned. Now, I'm not going to go through here because you got the unmarried and then you got the married and you got those who are married to believers, those who are married to unbelievers. If you just cut in here, whatever the rest of it says, and it's pretty self-explanatory, I'm not going to spend time on that, but it says, only as the Lord has assigned to each one. That word there for assigned can also be used, for instance, it's used in the Gospels where Jesus was distributing and he had the loaves and the fish, and so he distributed, he shared it with the people. It's as if God, who is a sovereign king, has assigned or he has shared. He has given us certain tasks, and then it defines that. It says, as God has called each. So whatever position you're in, because one of the themes in this chapter is if you're married, stay married. If you are single, stay single. And it doesn't put an absolute, it's not black and white, because in verses 20 and 21, he says, if you're a slave, stay a slave, except if you have the opportunity to be free, then go for it. That would be foolish not to take advantage of that. But here it simply says, only as the Lord has assigned to each one, as God has called each in this manner, let him walk. That the God who has called us is the God who has assigned us. One of the tasks that we have, if you want to use the term eschatological shepherding, is to realize God is the God who has placed us into positions. He is the king over those circumstances. I can't imagine having a theology where God just can't get his act together, or I just haven't prayed enough, or this or that or something else, and I find myself in the midst of difficulty. I am thankful as a pastor that there's a couple things I've had to deal with. One is I live in pain. I wouldn't volunteer for that, but in a sense, God will say, you did. I was getting ready to go on the pro golf tour, and literally one night, I told God to take a hike. And literally the next night, I hit a semi-truck head on. And I have head and neck injuries that'll be here until I go to be with the Lord. But I also know if I had not gone through those things or didn't live with it every day, I would look at people differently, and I understand what it's like to live with pain. And you know what? You can live with pain. It's okay. God's still God. I'm also thankful, when I was a pastor, I had a lot of experiences, but one of them, when I was down in Miami in 1992, Hurricane Andrew came, I lost everything. We had our home destroyed, our church destroyed. That was one of the greatest experiences of my life, to go with a whole group of people where almost everybody in the church together lost everything that we owned, all instantaneously. That was actually a great experience. As God has assigned, he's called us, and what has he called us to? To live in the midst of that. How do we do that? Look at the text here. Look at verse 23. He says, you were bought with a price. That's the sovereign God who's called us. He gives two illustrations, those who are circumcised, those who are slaves. And he says, you've been bought with a price. Do not become the slaves of men. Then he gives the term, remain in that condition in verse 24. And then if you look further, he gives the real recipe of what he's looking for here. You'll see in the section here where he deals with the fact that this age is not a fun age. This is an age of distress. Verse 26, he goes, I think then that this is good in view of the present distress, that it's good for a man to remain as he is. Then you skip down to verse 29. It says, but this I say, brethren, the time has been shortened. You go down to verse 31, it says, and those who use the world as though they did not make full use of it, for the form of this world is passing away. But I want you to be free from concern. One who is unmarried is concerned about the things of the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But the one who is married is concerned about the things of the world, how he may please his wife, and his interests are divided. He's not saying you can't get married. But he's saying, I'm urging you in light of the difficulty, that's something to consider, because you're considering the life, the world we live in for the Lord. Where's the goal? In verse 35, he says, this I say for your own benefit, not to put a restraint upon you, but to promote what is appropriate and to secure, look at this, undistracted devotion to the Lord. Undistracted devotion to the Lord. How often do we keep pushing our people back to the Lord? Back to the Lord. Back to the Lord. So that they would have undistracted devotion to the Lord. That they would be about the things of the Lord. I'm sure you guys all fight it in your own life. I know that my closeness to the Lord Jesus Christ is directly reflected by how much I'm attracted, attached, grabbing onto the things of this world. As we begin to put those in perspective and realize God has given me this for a purpose, that's good, but I need to hold on to it loosely. That's better. I can focus once again, undistracted, attention to Jesus Christ. That's in counsel. He says there's those who are single, married, divorced, remarried. In every situation, this is what you need to do. You got to look beyond yourself. You live not for yourself. You live for the Lord. You live attached to somebody and you go, well, I don't like him anymore. And he says, wait a minute. Let's take a step back. Maybe God is using you for their salvation. There's a bigger purpose in this, and that's the eschatological shepherding, that we are to be those that live right now, realizing that in the many tomorrows that may await us, God is working out his purposes, and that always brings us back right now, that as was talked about last night, that I would be a living sacrifice by the mercy of God. You guys have probably read this. Everybody's done this. Spiritual depression. I mean, where's your picture of Martin Lloyd-Jones? I love the doctor. I had the privilege of doing a lot of research on Martin Lloyd-Jones, some of my doctoral work. And I used to be able to imitate him to perfection. I love Martin Lloyd-Jones and how God used him in so many ways. In this book here, I've given out more of this book than any other book in my life, Spiritual Depression, this series of sermons by the doctor, in which he deals with things that each of us need to be constantly reminded of. And I love this one section where it says, learning to be content. And Lloyd-Jones simply says right here, he says, the word content does not fully explain it. He says it really means that he is to be self-sufficient, independent of circumstances, conditions, or surroundings, having sufficiency in oneself. And he's not talking about self-esteem or anything. He's just saying, you know what? We can live as Christians attached to the Lord Jesus Christ, focus on the Lord Jesus Christ, and we can actually become independent of what happens to us. Man, that's Christian freedom right there. And so when I have people coming to me and they keep saying, Chap, you're living the dream. Your kid is a professional baseball player. I was telling Jim, I said to one guy, I said, that's not the dream. The dream is it's a game. I'm thankful in God's providence that Jeremy has a girlfriend that reminds him it's a dream. It's nothing more than that. And I'm thankful in that Jeremy realizes he needs to work as hard as he can, but whether he succeeds or whether he doesn't, Jesus Christ is more important. That's being independent of our circumstances. And I can't remember who it is that said it, but I missed the first night because Jim and I were still driving from Colorado, but they said that, Gary, you had quoted Luke 21:28. And we think of the beauty of that where it says your redemption is drawing near. But if you look at that verse before that, it says two things. One, it says straighten up. Well, I mentioned earlier, I've had multiple surgeries, but they've always been from here up. And my neck in the last year has really started to deteriorate and hurt even more. And I know when my neck hurts more, it's easier to all of a sudden begin to do this, to slouch, because I don't want to do this because that hurts. And I know when I lean forward, that only makes my neck hurt worse. But it's easier to lean forward. Am I the only person that struggles with this? We got a bunch of guys that sit here at computers like this when we're supposed to be like this. Is that true? And so it's easier not to straighten up. I have to remind myself to straighten up, chin back, not necessarily up, and then you take your shoulder blades and you don't do this, you have to do this. Once I do that, it helps relieve some pressure on my neck. Straighten up, Luke said. Straighten up. Don't just slouch over. Straighten up, concentrate, and do what you need to do. And Sharon will come up to me and goes, that lasted for about 5 minutes. Come on, now get back to it. Because you build habits. And then the next part says, basically, look up. So we straighten up, and we look up. And that's looking up from distress. And we look up and we realize, my redemption's drawing near. The same one that said, he's coming, is in the process of working. And in working, he said, he will fulfill that which he begins. And none of us are finished products. And none of our people are finished products. But by God's grace, we can see a group of people that are washed and being the means of washing each other with the Word to present somebody else, to present God's people to His Son, that we might actually be the means for God to bring some of His people safely to be home with Him. That's eschatology being lived out. That's New Covenant eschatology. That's the beauty of eschatology being lived out in the Church of Jesus Christ. So you've had the absolutes and you've had the meat. May God help us to savor those things and have more confidence that Ron was talking about, that my hope is secure. My hope is set on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. That if I have Jesus Christ, I've got every dream that I'll ever want. And I want to persevere by God's grace to the end. Aren't you thankful He came to save sinners? And it doesn't say I'm the chief description. That's a verb. I'll leave that up to you guys, the smart guys. That's a me in the present right there. It's talking about, I am the chief of sinners, and He is the chiefest of saviors. That's what we need right there. Let's pray. Father, thank you for the time we've shared. Thank you for those who have stood here and pulled the depths of Scripture and made it very real, made it palatable, and yet made it so simple to realize it all draws us back to Christ. We look to one coming, and we thank God for the first coming. We thank God that the first coming was not all there was, that there's a second coming. And Father, we thank you that in everything in between, when this world goes crazy, that it's all because of your perfect purpose. We thank you that Jesus Christ sits upon His throne, and yet He doesn't just sit, but He continues to minister to His people. And someday, all tongues, tribes, and nations will worship the Lamb. Father, help us to live that out. Help us to have that hope right now. Help your Son with this group of people to be exalted. We thank you for the time we've shared in your word. In Jesus' name, amen.